My name is Catherine Hopkins. I'm Information Officer with the INMO, and today I'm going to be talking to you about sources of information and how these sources will help you in relation to your terms and conditions of employment. And the other Information Officer currently is Karen McCann. What we'll be looking at today will be the contract of employment, employer policies and procedures, INMO Publications, the Information Office and the Internet. Because this is a 15-minute session, I will be going through it a little quicker than normal. However, just be aware that my number is available on the at the end of this, or you can email if you have any queries in relation to anything we talk about today. Okay, so the first thing we're looking at is your contract of employment. Now, there's different, first of all, as when we get calls from nurses and midwives in relation to their contract of employment, sometimes they say, we don't have a written contract of employment. But once you're in receipt of a wage or a salary, you have a contract with, with your employer. However, we would recommend that you get a contract in writing, because if there's any ongoing issues later on, you can you can look at your contract, and if the employer says something about your wages or in relation to where you're working, you can say, well, I have a contract of employment and the contract clearly states what my terms and conditions are. Now, there's different types of contracts of employment. There's the written oral contract providing ongoing employment, permanent contract, contracted of indefinite duration. We have fixed term contracts for 1 year or a specified period. Some of the fixed term contracts can be renewed on a 4-year basis. Now, once the 4 years have run out, the contract should be made contracted indefinite duration, unless there's a good and valid reason that the role is no longer viable and that it was for a specific task. Maybe, for example, you were doing a research project, sometimes they end suddenly. But if it's a contract where it's renewable and you know that there is a vacancy there, that, after the 4 years on a contract of fixed term, that it should be deemed a permanent contract. And as Tony had said earlier, you have the Information Office, and you also have your IROs if you have any questions in relation to your contract. There's specific purpose contract that is to work for specific tasks. Say, for example, you have to replace somebody on sick leave, or you may be, replacing somebody who's on maternity leave. So once that nurse or midwife would return from maternity leave, the contract would end, and that would be that over with. Once an offer of employment is accepted, it cannot be withdrawn. Now, if you don't have initially a written contract of employment, you have a right to a written statement, and this is a 5-day statement. The employer shall provide the employee with a written statement of employment outlining the terms and conditions within 5 days of commencement of employment on the following terms and conditions of employment. So, your full name and address of the address of the employer, the expected duration of the contract in the case of a temporary contract, or end date if the contract is fixed term contract, the rate or method of calculation of the employee's pay, the number of hours the employer reasonably expects the employer to work per normal working day and per normal working week. In relation to your pay, for example, when you are, when you're being, we have got a job offer, firstly, always get it in writing that the job offer, that you have been, offered the job. If not, if you don't get it in writing, the employer could go back on their word in relation to offering you the role. So if ever you're applying for a job, that you get it in writing with a confirmation of your start date. And also what I would say is in relation to your pay. Now, this isn't really to do with pay slips, but it's something that's important, that when you are employed and you're paid a salary or wage, that you always keep an eye on your pay slip to make sure that you're getting your correct salary. If you're entitled to an allowance, the location allowance in some areas like medical or surgical, that you see that on your pay slip. because, and even in regards to your increment, for example, you know, with students, once you qualify, you enter the first point of the staff nurse salary scale for 16 weeks. And then following on for that, you enter, well, because of the new enhanced practice deal that was put together by the INMO, you will skip 2 and go to point 3 of the staff nurse salary scale. That is something you also want to keep an eye on, in that you know, maybe keep a reminder on your phone that when that date comes up, that you seek your 3rd point of the salary scale as a staff nurse or midwife, because sometimes the employer may forget, or because they have so many staff to keep, you know, to look after. It's important for you to be responsible for your pay as well as the employer. So just to mention that, because that's quite important. So we'll just move on. Also, you know, the terms of the written statement that you're required to give the employer in the Terms of Information Act 1984 will continue to be required within the existing 2-month period. New offences have been introduced. An employer who, without reasonable cause, fails to provide an employee with a 5-day statement within 1 month of commencement of employment will be guilty of an offence. An employer who deliberately or recklessly provides false or misleading information as part of the 5-day statement will be guilty of an offence. So it is important, if you haven't got a written contract initially, that you have a written statement outlining your terms and conditions of employment. And as I say, there are some of the things that should be on your written statement: full names of employer, address of employer, place of work, commencement date of employment, nature of contract, rate of pay, how you're paid, is it monthly or fortnightly, hours of work, annual leave, sick leave, pensions, notice period, collective agreements, retirement age, grievance and disciplinary procedures, confidentiality of information. Now, other terms that would not be in your contract of employment are what are called implied terms. That is the duty of the employer to provide a safe workplace and the duty of every employee to carry out the job to the best of their ability. Now, some of the contractual terms could be provided by laws passed by the Dáil, example, the right to maternity leave, parental leave, etc. Some of the contractual terms could be provided in a collective agreement, for example, the incremental credit agreement for nurses and midwives, and as Tony mentioned, the overtime agreement, which has changed from the 1st of July of this year under the Building Momentum. We also have flexible working agreement, which allows nurses and midwives to reduce their hours from a minute maximum of 39 hours to 38 hours, but that is subject to staffing needs. It's not automatic. It's just that it's a scheme that's available for nurses and midwives to avail of. We also have custom and practice. Really, the only custom and practice I can give as an example would be your designated 15-minute paid tea break in the mornings. Other than that, that's really the main custom and practice that would be in place in regards to timings. Now, let's move on. Also, there's different HSE circulars. We have the enhanced practice salary scale, the overtime rates, terms and conditions of employment, the public service sick pay scheme, superannuation schemes, and the single public service pension scheme. There's also acting up policy, compassionate leave, supplementary pension, and starting pay and promotion. Now, in relation to, we could look at the sick leave policy. We'll just take one of the leaflets here in regards to, your sick leave entitlements. We'll just pick that as one to look at. For example, there's 2 types of paid sick leave now for health service employees. One is the normal sick leave or sick pay, and that's 3 months full pay, 3 months half pay. And it starts from the first day of illness and it looks back over 4 years. So you also need to keep track of your sick leave as well. And then there's also critical illness protocol, and that's basically 6 months full pay, 6 months half pay. And that's basically an extension of the sick leave if you're out on what they call a serious illness. what sometimes members would ring up, they think that the normal sick leave and the critical illness protocol are two separate schemes. Unfortunately, they're not. So if a nurse is out on normal sick leave and they need an extension, and their occupational health agrees that they satisfy the criteria for the extended sick leave, which is 6 months full pay, 6 months half pay, but they will take into account the sick leave that would have been taken as part of the normal sick leave entitlements. So if you've used up 6 months of your normal sick leave, when it comes to getting the extended sick leave, they'll have to do the look back. So you would have used, for example, 3 months on full pay. So when it comes to the critical illness protocol, you just have a further extension of 3 months full pay and then 3 months on half pay. And then if that unfortunately runs out, there's also what is called temporary rehabilitation remuneration. And that's an extension of your sick leave should you be out longer than the 12-month period. It's just that is there for anybody, any nurse or midwife working in the public health service. Now, if you're working in the private sector, for example, unless the employer has, as part of their terms and conditions of employment, a sick leave policy that allows you sick pay, then you would be entitled to illness benefit from the Department of Social Protection. Now, illness benefit is only paid on the 3rd day. But it used to be longer, it used to be on the 6th day before, but it's been reduced now on the 3rd day that you'll be entitled to illness benefit. So if you're working in the private sector, that's something different to working in the public health service. Also, you know, in the private sector, the employer doesn't actually have to, one, provide a sick pay scheme, doesn't have to provide a pension scheme. So there are two things that would be beneficial by working in the public health service. Also, the salary scales. Most of the private hospitals would pay the current salary scales as outlined on our website, and also that's provided to us by the health service executive. But for example, some of the private hospitals like nursing homes, they may have their own salary scales. So if initially you're looking for a job, but as Tony said, the government has agreed that there will be jobs for nurses in the public service, that just to be aware when you're applying for jobs in the private sector, that you look out that the salary scales are similar. Now, what would be also different would be annual leave, for example. Annual leave in the public service goes from 0 to 5 years, so you get 24 annual leave days, and it increases as your service worked. In the private sector, the minimum you would get is 4 working weeks, provided you have worked 1,365 hours in the leave year. So they're just the differences in regards to, you know, working in the private sector and working in the public health service. Also in the public health service, there's 3 different types of superannuation schemes, which is listed here. Anybody that's coming in now as a new nurse or midwife, they would enter in the single public service pension scheme, which is career averaged. Again, if you want more information on that at a later time, you can contact the information office and we will help you out. So that's just a brief, so just something that would be important in particular. I said annual leave would be different. You know, between the public and the private. In the public health service, you have a pension scheme. You also have annual leave, which is in excess of what's available to the private sector. So that's just something to look at in the salary scales, as I say. Now, the INMO Publications, as you know, with the notice to members, we have the World of Irish Nursing journal, which is issued to members, as you know, once a month. We also provide the questions and answers in the journal in relation with, for example, we put up questions that we'll get from members. Now, we do have to change them around because we don't want the member to know that her question is going to be in the journal. So we try and put something up that it may affect another nurse or midwife, because we also get calls from members who say, oh, we saw a question in the journal and it's similar to what my query is in relation to my issue at work. So it is quite beneficial in that regard. So that's something that's in the world of Irish nursing, and well, it won't affect you. That's good to go. We also put the senior staff nurse, which is 17 years service now, in the journal for September and October, to remind members to apply for it, because the employer sometimes doesn't always come to them, so they have to go to the employer. So that's something that we also put in the journal just to keep members up to date in regards to the senior staff nurse. And as you know, all our nursing updates that sends to members via email and text message. And also we have webcasts and the INMO website. Now, the information office, basically, we do try to have a same-day response in relation to what our service that we provide. We also have a Getting It Right booklet. This is really for nurse reps, and basically we have all our leaflets and any information in relation to your terms and conditions of employment, all the leaflets from annual leave, sick leave, parental leave, maternity leave, anything that you require is in this little booklet. So if you're a rep, this would be very handy if anybody wants to be a rep. And then this is, I'll just show you brief some of our leaflets, agency nurses leaflets. We've annual leave, and we have the new overtime leaflet as well. So just we updated that recently. So that's something also that's beneficial to you at the moment, to make sure that you're paid your correct overtime rates and when is the right time to access overtime. So for example, if you're requested to do overtime at the end of the shift, you should seek overtime payment, and overtime is only paid in the event of working more than a 39-hour week. So just to be aware of that, or in the case of an employer rings you at home and requests you to come into work on a day off, you should request the overtime payment, even if you have, for example, if you work reduced hours. So that would be just something to be to remind you of. So as I say, we also have the INMO diary that's put together by the information office, the calendar, the salary scales. We update the website. I know we have all our questions and answers are up on the website, so that's also beneficial to members. We also do hospital visits, but at the moment there's no hospital visits, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, but normally we do that. And we also provide nurse rep training as well for nurses and midwives. So yeah, so I think, is that okay, Kieran, or have I any more time left? Or?
Great, Catherine, thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, you know where to get me.